Welcome to the interview when Conway Mill, an old linen factory, turned into a community enterprise in the heart of West Belfast, a part of Northern Ireland which had its share of suffering during the conflict. Our guest was first elected in this constituency in the 1980s. He led his party, Sinn Fein, for 35 years and recently stepped down. To some, he's the embodiment of the peace process, but to others, he's seen as a hate figure because of the violence perpetrated by the IRA during the conflict. Gerry Adams, Fulcher Athig, France 24. Welcome to France 24.
Thank you, and you're very welcome here.
20 years ago, a peace agreement, seen as historic, was negotiated here. You were one of its architects. What are your recollections of the last moments of the negotiations?
Well, first of all, we were all exhausted. It was difficult to know whether the deal would be clinched, and the Sinn Fein delegation didn't have plenipotentiary powers. We had made it clear that we would take whatever agreement there was back to our own party, back to our own broad constituency. So my sense as we went out, you were outside, it was snowing, or it had been snowing, there was a huge press melee. It was almost a feeling of anticlimax, because there's a lot of waiting about in negotiations, as you know, but also for those of us inside, we were waiting for David Trimble. And when eventually David gave his consent.
David Trimble was the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party at the time, the main Protestant party at the time.
They hadn't actually talked to us directly during the negotiations. That was Good Friday. On Easter Sunday, I had to speak to a commemoration in Carrickmore in County Tyrone. And I was a wee bit of trepidation about what the response would be to what had been achieved, even though we were convinced that we had a package which could work for everybody. Not perfect by any stretch, but better than what was there before. And I was embraced by two women at the commemoration. They were mothers of two IRA volunteers who had been killed by the British. And I knew then that we were on the right side of all of this, of those women who had suffered so grievously were prepared to give us a chance and prepared to give the agreement a chance.
20 years on, has the agreement lived up to its promises?
No, but George Mitchell said famously, he said this to myself and Martin McGuinness, God rest Martin, and he may have said it to others. When we got the agreement, he said, that's the easy bit. The hard bit will be implementing it. So peacemaking isn't one event. It's a journey, it's a process, it's an ongoing business that you have to get up every morning and work at.
20 years later, the agreement brought peace, but it hasn't brought political stability. The institutions born from the agreement, at Stormont, the power-sharing government, the Assembly, have collapsed. Is that not an indictment, a shocking indictment on politicians?
Well, of some politicians.
Over 3,000 people have lost their lives during the conflict, many at the hands of the IRA. Could that bloody conflict have been avoided? Do you have any regrets?
Yes, any thinking person would have regrets. It's dreadful that anyone was killed. It's dreadful that anyone was injured. It would have been far better if we had been able to find the type of dispensation which potentially is there even at this time, but that wasn't to be. However, let's remind ourselves, that's in the past. Now, that isn't to minimise the suffering, the bereaved families who grieve yet, the people who have been injured. And I say that as someone who's lost family members. I say that as someone who's been shot myself. But you can't undo the past. What's done is done. What we can do is make sure it never happens again.
Can violence for political means ever be justified?
Well, in given circumstances, but again, that's a question which has now ceased to have any relevance. The fact is there any justification for violence now? No. Then?
Was there ever?
Well, my position on that has been well known for a very, very long time. What we sought was an alternative to armed actions. Once we got that alternative with the help of John Hume, the leader of the SDLP, and others, then thankfully the IRA embraced that. But in every country's history, including in your own history, there have been occasions when people have, used armed resistance. In Ireland, famously, through centuries of English colonisation and occupation, some have resorted to armed actions. Now, no one has to do that, and no one should do that ever again.
Sinn Fein and the IRA have a goal, which is a united Ireland. When will that happen?
Well, first of all, the IRA have gone, and let's not underestimate that as one of the single biggest achievements of modern time, that a process which was heavily militarised has given way to a process now which has democratic and peaceful ways of getting to objectives. We will get a united Ireland when the people vote for it. We first of all need to get a referendum, and Sinn Féin wants that within 5 years, and we have to win people over to that view, and then we have to win the referendum.
Is it realistic to think that some British Prime Minister or Irish Taoiseach will call for a referendum on Irish unity in the short term?
Well, within 5 years, why not? It's part of the agreement. Why not?
Is it in their interest?
Whether it is or not, someday there may well be a Sinn Féin Taoiseach. Sinn Féin is one of the largest parties now in the north, is the third largest party in the south. We have a new leadership. A history of partition is a history of failure. And
but the truth is that you're nowhere near getting Irish unity in this island.
Well, come back and talk to me about that when we get it.
The UK decided to leave the European Union. This part of the UK voted to remain, but what consequences will Brexit have on the political process here in Northern Ireland?
Well, the political process is under pressure because the Tories have signed up to get rid of some of the European conventions and some of the European protocols on which elements of the Good Friday Agreement are based. So the political process was under pressure. First of all, Brexit has compounded that. The people here voted, as you say, to stay within the European Union. The British government are ignoring that. The Democratic Unionist Party are ignoring that. That's what the vast majority of people want. If Brexit goes ahead, as the Tories and the TUP appear to want, then the consequences will be dire for the people of the island, economically, socially, and in broad terms in the context of the Good Friday Agreement.
Does Brexit and the possibility of a hard border in Ireland threaten the Good Friday Agreement?
But of course, if you end up with a hard economic border, the economic consequences for the agri-food industry, for the dairy industry, for the small and medium enterprise, for the haulage industry, people have got used for the last 20 years. The border hardly existed in terms of all of those different sectors. If we have to pay tariffs, if you have to be stopped, if there are going to be custom posts and all the rest of it, that is to the detriment of the vast majority of people in the South.
And politically, what will be the cost?
Rights are the big issue. You see, what the promise of the Good Friday Agreement was in terms of rights was that those rights would be legislated for. Now, we have a situation where everywhere else in these islands, if you are gay or lesbian, you can have marriage equality. If you're a native speaker of Welsh or Scottish Gaelic, you can have legislative rights. You can't get that here. There's a Bill of Rights promised in the Good Friday Agreement, which has been held back on. So you have this very unique situation that in this part of the so-called United Kingdom, we have less rights than people in other parts of the so-called United Kingdom.
Can Brexit ever endanger peace here?
I think not. I think the peace process is secure. I mean, obviously there are small groups, and they do have the capacity to carry out individual actions, and we shouldn't minimise that or be at all, blasé about that, and we should absolutely set our face against that. But there is no communal desire for a return to conflict. In fact, the contrary is the case. The vast majority of people, notwithstanding the deficiencies of the ongoing process don't want any return to the past. And every politician should embrace the democratic principles of the Good Friday Agreement and ensure that the past never repeats itself.
If there is one thing you would want not to repeat that you've done in the past as a politician, as somebody who grew up in Northern Ireland, what would it be?
Well, probably many things. Nothing strikes me just immediately in response to that question. But one of the things that did strike me quite a few times was it took so long. It took so long from the first suggestions and proposals by me and by Father Alex Reid, who was a priest who helped to nurture the process, and Father Des Wilson, and myself and John Hume in our own way, that it took so long from those first initial suggestions and initiatives to getting to the Good Friday Agreement. So I've come to realise that you have to have a long-headed view of history, a long-sighted view of struggle. It's a process, not an event.
After a lifetime in politics worldwide, you're stepping down. What will be your legacy, Gerry Adams?
I don't mind. I won't be here.
What about your children and your grandchildren?
Well, they'll make their own lives, and thankfully will do so in a free and united Ireland.
Gerry Adams, thank you. The interview is over. Stay with us on France 24.